It is said that history repeats and there's nothing new under the sun. Is this true? And what of nurture versus nature? What influence do we, consciously, have over our past, present, and future? There's a complex interplay of energies present at this full moon, with no less than 6 dimensions of reality activated. Hey there, Truth Seeker. Welcome to the Star Kittens community, where we discuss 13-sign astrology. Are you in alignment with your divine design? Do you want to master the metaphysical reality? Open the doors of perception. Each planetary body is an archetype, a template, if you will, that helps us interpret human behavior and the world around us. The more awake and aware we are, the more synchronicity will show up in your life. Our focus today is the Leo full moon. We will spotlight and interpret the transformative T-square with Uranus and the conjunctions of the Sun with Mercury in Capricorn. To help us reach more souls with this important message, please like, share, and subscribe. There is a lot going on, so let's jump in. Kia ora, David.
Kia ora.
Are we having a good day?
Absolutely. You?
A nice, warm, sunny day, even went for an ocean swim. So today we are going to talk about the full moon in Leo. And I find that so interesting because the Leo is, its guardian is the sun, but it's the opposite of the moon being in that energy now. So I very much look forward to how that is going to play out. For those people listening, the sun at the full moon is at 24 degrees Capricorn, and the moon is at 5 degrees Leo. And we're also highlighting the T-square with Uranus, and Uranus is sitting at 24 degrees Aries. So what is the overview today?
Well, I guess the first thing that jumped off the page when I was having a look at this is how much masculine energy there is. You've got the Sun and Mercury conjunct in Capricorn, which is very much a masculine sign. You've got Uranus in Aries, a very powerful position for Uranus to be. That's lightning and fire together. And you have the moon in Leo, of course, Leo being a masculine sign as well. So really huge amount of fire and masculine energy coming through. Was just the initial off the top. Thoughts, perceptions about this particular reading. The moon, of course, and we're going to spend some time talking about the moon and its role in astrology today. Not so much the moon in Leo, although we will touch on that, but we'll talk about the moon as the repository of our soul memories that reside in our unconscious mind, and why, with the T-square involving Uranus, why this is so important to really grasp and understand. So we're going to spend a bit of time focusing on that moon as the repository of soul memories and what that actually means and how we can use it in a practical sense at this full moon to help us move forward and evolve, in fact. With the moon, there's always karmic residues that surface and break through into our awareness, particularly with Mercury on one side and Uranus involved as well. So this is an opportunity for clearance and disentanglement from the past. If memories represents that which has happened, then this is an opportunity to clear the past. The moon also represents, of course, lineage and roots. And in a very fundamental sense, lineage and roots refers to our genetics, our genome, our DNA, and we will touch on that, and I'll give an illustration of genetics and its impact on us via the moon archetype a little later. The moon energies come to us through dreams, through reverie, but also because Mercury is involved in this full moon, through mental loops, repetitious thoughts, for example. The T-square with Uranus signals abrupt but unpredictable change. And ultimately, the big picture here is freedom from constraints, breakdowns or breakthroughs. There's 6 dimensions active at this full moon. That's pretty incredible. It doesn't always happen, but certainly when you look at the interplay of the archetypes and what's going on, that's absolutely what's happening. There's the physical reality in Capricorn. There's the mental energy of Mercury. There's the emotional energy of the moon. There's spiritual energy as well. There's the Akashic record energy, which is the Uranian energy. And there's the astral energies of the moon as well. The moon has multiple facets and dimensions. The moon in Leo specifically, in one sense, and this is pretty easy to understand, means fiery emotions, exuberance, excitement, playfulness, but also petulance and grand displays. On a personal level, a full moon, particularly in Leo, can be about letting off steam and lifting the lid on emotional repression. It can also be about simply partying and dancing and enjoying the physical world, particularly with that Capricorn energy on the other side. So there's a strong desire whenever the moon is in Leo to be seen and to be heard. This favors show ponies and drama queens. It's a time to let go, and it may mean a loss of emotional control. That's one aspect of this. But on the other side of it, because of the Mercury energy and the moon, the sun in Capricorn, which is quite a constrained energy, and we've talked a lot about the ruler of Capricorn being Saturn, so therefore of mastery and lessons. The other side of that exuberance and outward display of emotion is emotional intelligence, emotional control, and management of our feelings. On a collective level, the moon, full moon in Leo opposite the sun in Capricorn is about bold moves by leaders, managers, and those in authority. They're fueled and confident at this time. That's the Capricorn Leo energy together. There's a lot of king of the hill energy here, browbeating and lording it over others. That's the Capricorn energy flowing through into this Leo moon. So I expect some grandiose displays by leaders, governors, presidents, rulers, and those in authority during this full moon as well.
Get the popcorn ready.
Yeah, absolutely.
So give us some more info then of what you were saying before. We're going to dive into that moon energy. The moon is the guardian of Cancer, and it's just the next sign over in Leo. And my son, his sun and moon are in Cancer, but he has Mars in Leo, and I can definitely see, also that playfulness, and there's definitely sometimes that fieriness. But yeah, having your moon in Leo would be an interesting combination, I think. So what is your take?
Yeah, most certainly. You've got the reserved side of the moon, and as you mentioned, her home sign is the sign of Cancer. And then you've got the exuberance and the expressiveness of the sun and the Leo energy as well. But let's take a step back, and before we touch too much on the moon and Leo, I'm going to go in a slightly different direction, because I think that understanding a little bit about the moon's role in the astrological mosaic is quite important here. So I'm going to take us through a little bit of a journey through the moon archetype, which is actually the most complex in astrology to understand. It has so many different aspects to it. So before we even think about how the energies of the Sun and Mercury and Uranus interact with this quiet, reserved moon, let's understand a little bit about the role that the moon plays in astrology and why, especially in readings and interpretation, she is so important. And yet, with all of that said, the moon's energy moves very quickly as well. But let's go back almost like to ground zero here. The moon archetype is the archetype of the soul, and that means that the moon's expression in our lives comes through gut instincts, knee-jerk reactions for survival, and our reflexes. So that when we're dealing with life, this is where that energy comes through. And when we're doing interpretations and readings, we certainly focus on that. The reading of the moon, therefore, is where our phobias, our fears, our predilections, which means our preferences or our leanings, and our neuroses exist. So when we're doing an interpretation or a reading for somebody and they're struggling with some things, with fears or neuroses, for example, and they can't quite put their finger on it, often it comes back to the moon and a difficult relationship that it may have in terms of, a square or whatever with another planet or a conjunction, for example. But these neuroses, these fears, these phobias, they come through and bleed into our awareness as distressing emotions, as obsessive thoughts when you involve Mercury as well, and compulsive behaviors. The moon is where our disintegrated self exists. This is where we have experienced multiple realities, timelines, and dimensions as soul, and all of that is bleeding through into our awareness. In other words, into our intellect, which is represented by the archetype of Mercury, what I call the Mercury mind. So the role of the Mercury and the moon together is very important. The Mercury mind or the intellect manages and mitigates those energies that bleed through, these soul memories, these obsessive thoughts, these compulsive behaviors, these knee-jerk reactions, these gut instincts. The role of Mercury is to manage and mitigate that, because as that comes through into our awareness, through our behavior, and we see the reflection of the way we're behaving and reacting to things in the physical world, Capricorn. Mercury's role, or our intellect, is to assess that and to manage those energies via the process of socialization, which is effectively figuring out, and this happens, you mentioned your sun before, but this process of the moon energy bleeding through and into our awareness, and the Mercury's kind of as a manager of that energy via the process of socialization begins in childhood. So let me give you an example. A child reacts instinctively to something, and then the parents or the people around them think, why are you reacting like that? That's really irrational. That doesn't really make sense. And the combination of that mercurial feedback modifies the behavior, and that's the process of socialization. So in a sense, Mercury kind of puts a lid over the moon expression in our lives, if that makes sense. So Mercury helps us when dealing with this internal churning, this emotional stuff that comes out into our lives, as I said, through obsessive thoughts, distressing emotions, anxieties, fears, neuroses, and so on, compulsive behaviors. Mercury recognizes all that and helps us to understand the rules of the social game, the rules of courtship, the rules of countenance, which is understanding how we react to and deal with leaders, how we countenance gifts in our lives and favors in our lives. Mercury helps us to understand the social climbing process, and the Capricorn energy here helps us to understand those structures, those social structures in the hierarchy. So we've got this interplay of Mercury acting almost like a governor, if you like, that sits over the top. This is our intellect that sits over the top of this emotional impulses, these urges and surges which constantly present themselves in our life. And that's the role of the moon and the Mercury interplay. Now, therefore, always, or there should be, in a well-developed human, a strong relationship between the Mercury or rational mind or the intellect and the moon and the unconsciousness or the memories or the instincts that are coming through. And sometimes we don't even know where they're coming from. So we can ask ourselves at this full moon, where do these instincts come from? Where do these fears come from? Where do these neuroses, these obsessive thoughts, these compulsive behaviors, these distressing emotions, where's it all coming from? And just that's a key here. So the soul is the recorder of all of our perceptual experiences. If you like computer analogies, the soul is like both the hard disk drive and the cloud. In the Vedic astrology, which is much older than Western astrology, of course, but the Vedics have figured some of this stuff out, and they talk about the four minds. And I won't go into that now. Suffice to say that the Manas, or the moon, is one of the four minds that they talk about. Now, mind in this sense is responsible for processing all sensory perception. So as we exist, and we've talked about this before, we have five senses. So we have the sense of touch and taste and smell and hearing and seeing. All of that sensory information lodges in our subconscious, which in astrology is the moon. That's why we call it the repository of memory, of soul memory, not just in this lifetime, but all realities, all dimensions, all aspects of us that exist everywhere, all at once. So the manas intermediates or acts, as I said before, between the emotions and the soul memories coming from the moon and the intellect of Mercury, which is the role of Mercury, as I said before, is to help us socialize and communicate and figure out who's who in the zoo, how to function in this world. Our intellect, Mercury, therefore orders our experience, hopefully in some sort of logical way, so that we can go back and reference it. And this is where the linear timeline of this life, where we can look back at a photo of 5 or listen to some music and it takes us back to when we were 15 or 16, or somebody reminds us of a story of when we turned 21. That's what I call the linear timeline. And that is the function of Mercury, shuffling all of those memories into some sort of cohesive library. And I've talked about that before. So we have that type of memory, but we also have the soul memories, which is of other timelines, of other realities, of past lives. And those who ascribe to reincarnation and the works of, say, Dolores Cannon, for example, who have done past life regressions or who believe in the multiple planes of existence, will understand that the soul is fluctuating and moving across all of those realities, whereas the Mercury mind is only operating in pretty much the here and now and what we call the linear or the concrete timeline that we can put a finger on and say, yep, that happened at 9 or 15 or 55. So we've got this interplay here, and it's very important. I'm setting the scene, and I'm taking some time to do this because there's no point going to Uranus, the awakener and the enlightener, until we understand what it is that Uranus is supposed to be doing here. So sometimes our soul or moon energy is running scripts, and we're not conscious of these programs. We only become conscious of them through the mirror or the lens of our behavior, often through frustration, often through we're not getting what it is that we want. That is often subconscious scripts, and there are so many people out there on the internet today that talk about the laws of manifestation, and they say you have to unwind some of those unconscious scripts. Well, those unconscious or self-limiting behaviors, those compulsions, those fears and phobias, that is the moon in astrology. That's where it exists. And when we're doing readings, we hone in on that and we look at that very closely, especially if it's getting in the way emotionally. So those scripts or programs coming through from our memories across these multiple timelines and dimensions and realities bleed through, and Mercury often, our intellect, doesn't recognize it sometimes and gets confused. So sometimes our reality can be we feel or sense something and yet we're thinking something different. And this is where you get into this head-heart incoherence. Of course, Joe Dispenza talks a lot about that. We have to have our head and our heart aligned. Well, this is the process in the astrological framework of how it actually happens. The energy of the south node of the moon, called Ketu by the Vedics, represents past life associations. And it is the record, they call it, the record of all sensory perception. So they believe in reincarnation. They believe in multiple dimensions as well. Mercury formats effectively our hard disk drive, again using computers because it's quite a simple analogy. And it formats and configures the software that's running in our lives. The higher self in this situation is represented by Uranus, and we're going to touch on that in a moment. But the higher self is the orchestrator executing and overseeing all experiences. So the experiences in the function of Mercury and also that bleed through into our awareness from the moon. At this new moon, a full moon, fire of Leo, we are to combine fire, which means action, with deep soul memories and instincts and neuroses, and to bring them to the surface in Leo, a playful way. And what do we mean by play? Role playing, acting out, making sense of our memories. But Mercury gives us also a tool here that as these memories come through dreams, through reverie, through repetitious thoughts, through reflecting on our compulsive behavior, we can modify our behavior through awareness, and that's the role of Mercury. But we've got to play with this stuff. And that will help us to integrate the past into the present so that we can face the future unencumbered and fearless.
Fearless, that sounds good. Just what you were saying with how some children have this behavior or attitudes towards stuff that they've never experienced before. And I think a lot of that, yes, it's from past memory, but also the projections of the adults in their life. For example, the dentist, right? How many children have this fear of a dentist, but all they've ever had is just a quick checkup. How many teeth have you lost? How many have come through? Are they semi-straight? And that's a dental checkup for a young child. But because the parent might have had quite a bad experience at some point, they have projected this fear onto the child, and the child is already scared. Whereas I love going to the dentist. I've had the best experiences with my dentist. Yes, I've had fillings when I was young, but it was such a pleasurable experience from a very young age all the way through that my children now, they skip hop into the dental chair and they enjoy it and they have conversations and it's just such a fun experience all round. And just think about, is the child scared of insects because they are or because the parent always has been? And you can just, if you're able to hold your projections, your fears, your judgments to yourself and assist a child as much as possible to have a blank slate in those situations, then they can form their own opinions without us putting that filter over it. So thank you for deep diving into the moon energy. My moon in Gemini is in Interesting combination because I have that Mercury energy there, so it's, I guess, good for me. So now that we've set the scene, how would you like to tie the whole T-square of the Sun, Moon, and Uranus all together?
Yeah, this is an exciting time for those who are awake and aware and those who are on the process of evolving their consciousness and working towards a more effective expression of who they are. This is a really exciting time, and there are lots of tailwinds here. And if you can ride them through awareness, then you can have a quantum leap here in one of these realities that I talked about. You could have a quantum leap in the mental area. You could have a quantum leap emotionally. You can have a quantum leap physically as well. So the role of Uranus is in the astrological system, or the mosaic, is he's called the awakener. And I like to juxtapose or overlay that awakening as actually our higher self interceding, and the higher self being the connection with the divine, the direct connection with the divine intelligence, the universal intelligence. And in fact, when you look at the tree of life, for example, whether you ascribe to that or not, it serves its purpose insofar as the Dath, D-A-A-T-H, is Uranus, which is the awakener or the enlightener. So that's the role of Uranus here. And he is represented by, metaphorically, lightning. And of course, we don't know when lightning's going to strike. And that's part of the mystery of this. But in this context, and I've spent this time laying down or setting the scene about the soul and its memories, then the role of Uranus here is to stir up some of those memories that exist in the astral plane. And so let me just take a step out as well about the astral plane. A lot of people have realized that when we sleep, we go somewhere else. Our consciousness, our physical body is prone or is lying down, but we can experience other stuff, other realities. But that not only happens when we're sleeping, it can also happen, excuse me, through daydreaming or creative visualization. You can take yourself into other planes of reality, and one of those planes is the astral plane, the plane of memory. So the soul, or the past parallel lives and experiences, exist in this astral plane. Excuse me. So therefore, the Uranus role here, the Uranian energy, is incredibly unpredictable. It may strike, it may not. Uranus is the archetype also of innovation, which is change and insight, breakthrough. And Uranus energy is the vector or pathway through which our higher self, it can use multiple pathways, but this is one of the ways that our higher self can use to shake us up, to get us out of a rut. And I need some water here. I've touched on the moon as being this repository of memory, of soul memories, or what they call the manas in the Vedics, which is this hard disk drive, if you like, or the cloud of all experiences. But the moon also is the overseer, or the archetype of lineage and roots, and effectively that means our genetics. And when we think about us as humans, all of us, we have 50% genetics from our father and 50% from our mother. So let's play this out because it's fascinating. This is yet another angle of where this Uranian energy can manifest in our lives. If the moon is lineage and roots, or our genetics or genome, 25% of us, in fact, is genetics from our grandfather and our grandmother. And again, if you keep going back in the generations, we have genetics, a little bit of our genetics of our great grandfather and great mother, and even our great great, is it great 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 grandfather and grandmother and grandparents coming through our genetics. So, in fact, within us, this is this moon energy and the memories. And memory also comes from genetics. And this is how genetics works because it contains memory of what to do. It's a program, and you can see that in plants and everywhere. I mean, how does a tree grow? It remembers. How does a flower bud at a particular time? We have these crickets or cicadas here. They come out only at a particular time. That's all genetics. But we are an incredible mix of genetics that goes back up to 4 generations. So that means in our lineage and roots within this moon archetype, we're carrying energies, impressions, and imprints from as much as 100+ years ago. If we go back 100 years from now, and this is this Leo energy or playing with this, right? Leo is playfulness. Here's a way to just play a little game. 2025, 1925. What were some of the things that may have been imprinting on our lineage and our roots as humans back then? Benito Mussolini declared himself a dictator of Italy. We were right between 2 world wars. Hitler released Mein Kampf. Charlie Chaplin released The Gold Rush. And Louis Armstrong made his first recordings. These seminal events left imprints and impressions on the humans living at that time. Therefore, some of us carry some of that energy in our lineage and roots. These impressions and imprints are energy. They're energetics because of the way that we emotionally react to these things. We listen to some music and we react. That imprints on our soul memory, our manas, our moon. And it's always there, even though we may not be conscious of it. So this is how it works. This is how Ketu, the south node, works in astrology. Why it is so important. You and I have talked about how our south nodes are the same. We both have a south node or Ketu in Libra, and that's one of the reasons that we feel we have such a strong soul connection, because our past lives were both experienced as Libras. So these ideas and concepts of reincarnation that come through from the Eastern mysticism and the parallel realities, which of course the quantum physicists are now playing with. I mean, I saw a post or a blog the other day about that new Google Willow chip, and they're talking about the quantum physicists are discovering that we are living in multiple realities. There's a soup, a dimensional soup, and we're inserting ourselves in and out. This is what the scientists are discovering. Of course, the Vedics and the Eastern mystics have always known this. But all of this is to do with our memories and our genetics, which contain memories. Memories of another world, memories of other realities. So Uranus's role here is to trigger an awakening and an awareness of those memories for 2 reasons. And this is why I talk about breakdown and breakthrough. The lightning strikes into our lives and our higher self. There's a timing for everything. Sometimes that Uranian energy, and particularly at this full moon, can come in suddenly to clear and release these memories because genetically and emotionally they're no longer serving us. In other words, they're getting in the way. So that's a eureka moment. You do energy healing, and perhaps you can reflect on that in a moment, maybe an example of that. But tapping, emotional freedom technique, how does that work? We tap into a meridian and we can emotionally release memories. We can use an aromatherapy, and that sense of smell can release memories. We can listen to or taste something. This is tapping into the repository of the Manas or the moon. So that Uranian energy functions via these modalities, especially in a Capricorn energy, which is Earth. So we're talking about being awakened and becoming aware of our memories so that we can clear and release them genetically and emotionally, or we can be unleashed to propel our evolution. So just like genetics can turn on all of a sudden, we can go in a different direction. We can go to another dimension. We can take a quantum leap. All of that is on the table under this full moon with this Uranian energy very present. And we'll show it on the screen, but a T-square means that Uranus is at the apex of a triangle. So he, as higher self, is sitting on both sides. We've got sun and the moon in opposition, but at the top. So this is what I mean about this kind of higher self being the orchestrator. And it's quite important to visualize that. If the sun is our confident self-expression and the moon is our memory, and Uranus is the vector of the higher self, bringing together this merging of emotional intelligence, of intellect, that we can powerfully move forward, or alternatively, bringing to our awareness, like I mentioned, through those physical vectors that trigger our senses to help us break through limitations and move to another level of reality.
Mm. Yeah, I do energy healing, as you mentioned, and sometimes an emotion, I figure out which emotion it is that is ready to be released, and the only thing that I need is just a five-year time span that occurred for that person. So let's say it was fear between the ages of 5 and 10, and that's all I need to say, and the person straight away knows, yep, that's it. And I don't need to know more of who was it, where was it, exact age. None of that is needed. But because it's been brought to the surface, it was ready to be released. Just that small insight, then we're able to release it. The body is ready to let it go. So I find that fascinating that, you have someone in front of you, and the beauty about energy healing for me is that we don't have to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk about it. We're able to, it's the right place at the right time to have those insights from Uranus, um, to have those very small trigger words, and then it brings you to the right place for that then to be released. So thank you for bringing that up. Beautiful energy of Uranus. It You have already made quite a few links today. We've spoken about Mercury being conjunct with the Sun and using that mercurial mind to kind of give some structure to the structure of Gemini, the two pillars, some structure to all these beautiful memories that are coming up. We've spoken about Uranus in Aries, lots of fire, Moon in Leo. So how would you like to bring it together and close it out?
Yeah, and just before I do that, going back to what I was saying before, is that the Capricorn energy is important here as well because it gives a context for how the Uranian breakthroughs will manifest. And, you can consciously, like you're talking about, go after a breakthrough. That's the thing here. Like we could sit back and wait and nothing could happen, or something could happen. Like lightning could just strike, or it may not. But we could also prepare ourselves for a lightning strike by seeking a healing session, by doing some emotional tapping or emotional freedom technique, by going to a chiropractor and freeing our neck, by doing some yoga asanas, by doing some tai chi. I mean, there's just, think of any physical modality. And as I said, I touched before on, let's not forget that the if the soul is the repository of all sensory memories, then sometimes tasting something or hearing something or seeing something or smelling something can also help us to break through. So there's a number of options here, and let's not forget that Capricorn is about mastery over the physical world. So this isn't necessarily about a airy-fairy sit in meditation and be receptive. Obviously, being mindful and meditative is part of the process of awakening, but this is the masculine energy here is about taking action, and you talk about structure. It's about getting ourselves into alignment with the opportunity to manifest in our lives. In fact, they say that luck is where preparation and opportunity intersect. So get prepared is the key. And that's the message of Saturn or Capricorn energy, Saturnian energy, Capricorn energy. But bringing it together in summary is liberation, sovereignty, freedom, and release. They are the headline, if you like. Liberation, sovereignty, freedom, and release. This is a full moon specifically about creating awareness of our instincts, our neuroses, our phobias, our predilections, our preferences, our knee-jerk reactions that actually exist in the moon's energy or the manas energy. How many of us, perhaps chuck that in the comments, how many of us have had an experience where we might be very comfortable, somebody's very comfortable jumping off a bungee jump, and somebody else says, oh, I can't do that, I have a fear of heights. Where does that fear, and they look back in their lives and maybe their mum and dad never had a fear of heights, but it's coming through maybe the genetics or it's coming through the soul memory. Sometimes there are these irrational fears that exist, these things that hold us back that we can't nail. And that's where this intuitive, extrasensory perceptions and intuitive healing comes in. Sometimes we can figure out, yep, I know exactly what happened, but often we can't. And I talk about, and you and I talk about this as well. We love that idea, and this is the Capricorn energy of cause and effect, the karmic energy, cause and effect. Sometimes we don't know the cause, but we can feel and sense the effect. And we don't need to always know the cause. And that's what you've just touched on there. But if we can clear the effect, we're actually dealing with liberation and freedom and release by not even worrying about going to the roots of it, because sometimes it's impossible to know. The Capricorn energy with the Sun and Mercury together there, as you mentioned, provides structure to this process of working through breakdowns and breakthroughs. It's okay for things to break down sometimes. That gives us an opportunity to do something different, to innovate, which is Uranian energy. I've done today, or hopefully have done today, or given us an understanding of the machinery, the software, the hardware, and the programs that are running in our lives in the subconscious and the conscious intellect. And I've talked about the relationship between Mercury as the intellect and the moon as the memory. The moon, the Ketu, past life, what the Vedics called the Ketu, or the manas, the repository of all perceptual memories, scripts, programs running in our lives. Mercury is the intellect that sorts all of those experiences out into a cohesive timeline and a worldview, but also helps us to fit in and socialize. The Sun here is about confident self-expression, but it's really hard to be confident if you haven't dealt with your emotions and your memories, if you haven't dealt with and tackled your self-limiting beliefs, those fears and phobias, those neuroses, those obsessive compulsive thoughts, those anxiety. If you haven't got to the bottom of that, and no matter how much you fake it till you make it, it's going to be really hard to be confident and to express the Sun. So we have to look at this from the other way, from starting with the moon and ending up at the Sun. If we want to be free from mental loops, from emotional blocks and distorted memories, we've got to do some work. we've got to prepare ourselves, and that's the Capricornian energy, ruled, of course, by Saturn, of mastery over the physical world and our physical reality as well. And when we are ready and got ourselves organized, Uranus has a role to play in providing insights and awareness to wake us up, to push us forward, to project us into another timeline. We suddenly get this can work positively or negatively. It can be a sudden breakthrough that we never saw coming in our business, in our relationships, in our health, our wealth, whatever it happens to be. Leo, though, is about play. Play with our reality. And look at those shadow distortions of Leo as much as the other side of it. But there's shadow distortions, and we will see this at a full moon in Leo for sure. But this is the loudest voice. This is the attention seeking, the drama queens and the meltdowns. That's one side of a Leo full moon with Mercury on the other side. But the positive, and where I'd like to finish this, the positive, more helpful way, I guess, of approaching this Leo full moon is to go inward. That is the moon energy, is to go inward, is to introspect, despite all the outside noise, to do some dream work, to do some mind mapping, Mercury, to use a diary to reflect so that we can see patterns of behavior in our life, to identify self-limiting energies. But that's going to require us to engage our brain, our intellect, and it's going to require us to take a look at what's going on really objectively, almost to sit back and say, and one way to do that is to track. We can use often I speak sometimes if I'm having a profound experience, I'll speak into my phone and then I'll listen to it maybe years later, but also writing stuff down. So here it is: liberation, sovereignty, freedom, and release. The choice is yours. Which path will you go down at this full moon?
Let us know in the comments if you have
Yes.
enjoyed our conversation. Please give us a like, drop a comment, share it with your loved ones. If you've watched us, you can listen on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you've listened, you can watch all our videos on YouTube. If you would like to know where your moon sits and get a deep dive into your soul memories, you can hit us up for a natal reading. Thank you, David, for sharing your beautiful knowledge with us all.
You're welcome.
Ngā mihi, until next time.
Goodbye.